In the interest of modest financial transparency, 10% of all ad revenue generated from this video will be donated to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, because online or offline, money should not be the judge, jury, and executioner. And now for the feature presentation. Over the decades, video games have proven themselves to be a new medium of entertainment standing with movies and music. This is easily proven by the fact that people make a living off of reviewing video games for their quality. As with all mediums of entertainment, people have differing thoughts on what is good and what is horrible. My first video on this channel was about the 10 most underrated video games, but I feel I never went into enough depth. As such, I feel as though remaking the important part of that list was an excellent idea. To stay fresh, I'm going to be covering new territory with a list of the most overrated video games as well. But I want to get a few things out of the way first. Underrated does not mean good, and overrated does not mean bad. However, these definitions are expected to and will overlap near the end of both lists. Another thing I must mention is that I'm not going to be pulling any punches with my thoughts. A fellow by the name Joshua Berner has made a list of what he believes to be the most overrated games. He was a respectable person. He rarely became angry, and when he did, he was able to bring himself back in. This video will be nothing like that. If there's one thing I've learned from his video, it's that no matter how well-mannered you try to be and how much effort you put into your video, people will still dislike your video to high heaven if they disagree with you. I really fail to see the point in censoring my thoughts if the results will not be any different. With that in mind, let's begin.
Number 5, underrated.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. I have never met a person that dislikes Punch-Out for the Wii. The characters and their personalities are memorable, with Doc Lewis leading the pack with his humor. The game fits into a niche where it's not really a sports game as much as it is a puzzle rhythm game. You need to learn how to exploit your opponent's attacks and fake-outs, and once you do, you need to time your movements to the point where it's almost as though you are dancing with your opponent. Hell, the only thing I can really say negatively about this game is that it recycles the Punch-Out theme way too much. It's an excellent song almost every single time, but it becomes tiring if you play more than 3 different boxers in a row. The game also has a choice between motion control if you've been weaned off of Wii Sports, or NES style if you played the original Punch-Out featuring Mike Tyson or Mr. Dream. So what makes this game so underrated? Almost nobody has played it. I don't even think it sold over 1 million copies. That's a horrible message to send to Nintendo.
Number 5, overrated.
Don't get me wrong, I love LA Noire, on an aesthetic level. For the most part, Aaron Staton does a AAA job as Cole Phelps, even when the face-posing technology required him to do unfathomable acting. The other characters are acted out well too. Think the story is just about a perfect detective that solves crimes? Wrong. It develops a story about a man who finds himself in the right place at the right time almost all his life, then quickly falls from grace and has to come to terms with the transgressions of his past decisions, ending with him making the ultimate leadership decision. That's all I'm saying about the ending. That, and that there are seats in hell reserved for people like Roy Earl. What a douchebag. But this is an overrated game. Why? Because just about everything else falls flat on its face. The graphics come in 3 flavors: quality, performance, and balance, which are hippie talk for lag central, puke-tastic, and an unhappy medium of the two. I heard this just might be a result of the PC port of the game, but that couldn't excuse gameplay or control. Phelps always feels like he wants to run in a straight line, and wanting to switch directions felt more difficult than it should have. Just about everything you can do in a car, be it driving from point A to point B or chasing a suspect, is tedious. The gunfighting is a copy-pasted cover system, and the fistfights are dodge, punch, repeat. These 2 fighting mechanics might not have been as bad if they weren't so unbalanced. I know the Marine Corps tries to make their soldiers strong, but Phelps can take about as much as 6 times as much punishment as any person you are apprehending, be it punches to the face or blows from a shotgun. Finally, there's the interviews. At first it's good, but eventually the truth-doubt-lie system gets ahead of you, and when you mean to say one thing, your character will say something completely different, as I've covered before.
Do you have any idea why anyone would want to hurt your wife?
No. Everyone loved Teresa. She was so full of life. It can't be anyone who knew her.
Oh, come on, there's gotta be someone in life that hated her.
For the record, Terrence, did you kill your wife?
What?
Oh my god. No. I didn't kill my wife. Fuck you for suggesting it.
Grade A interrogation skills, detective. There's also no penalty for claiming someone to be a liar until you present evidence, so you can claim the interviewee is lying, see if Cole comes up with a crackpot theory or a decent one, examine the description of all your evidence to see if it contradicts a statement, and if everything lines up for the worst, just back out and choose another option. Avoidable, but it still feels silly. As the game goes on, people's faces become harder to read, so it all winds down to guessing. Also, at one point in the game, I saw a person walking in the air. Hilarious, but immersion became even more broken than before. Unless Team Bondi has yet another scandal on its hands, it accurately posted reviews for LA Noire on its website, where critics praise the game when it's really a 6.5 out of 10 at best. A lot of effort was put into LA Noire, that much is apparent. However, effort alone doesn't work. It's where you apply it that will make the difference between a great game and a mediocre one.
Number 4, underrated.
Let's talk ports for a moment. When a game becomes old enough, companies port their games to newer consoles for a new generation. It's like what George Lucas did with Star Wars on Betamax, video cassette, and DVD, except not every 2 or 3 years. The Game Boy Advance was a very strong tool for porting, especially for Super Nintendo games. I played many games on the Super Nintendo when I was very young, and I enjoyed replaying them on my Game Boy Advance. Heck, my very first game I ever bought with my own money was Super Mario World for the GBA. Out of all of them, Donkey Kong Country is often considered the worst, and although that may just be because they're all pretty awesome and one of them has to be the worst, I find it to be pretty great. What I hear most about the game is complaining about how the game looks pixelated and that the sound and music quality are both terrible. Clearly, these people have only seen the footage of this game on YouTube, since when the game is played on a Game Boy Advance, the pixelation compresses into a better picture and the sound, if coming from the speakers, sounds fine. Beyond that, the game has included extras to make the game fresh. You can collect camera icons to unlock game art, you can save at any time rather than trudging to a point that may be halfway through an unexplored world, and it has some pretty good minigames. If I told you that a Donkey Kong DDR game on the Game Boy was actually good, you'd probably be in sheer disbelief, right? Well, it's as good as they can make it. It uses all the buttons except for start and select, and becomes insane in difficulty near the end of the game. The game as a whole is pretty awesome. And Scrambled Egg, if you're watching this video, I want to let you know that I still cringe when I think about my reaction to when you gave me this game for my 9th birthday. I thought I had already played the entire game before, and that you had bought it only so you could play it whenever you came over. Stupid and inconsiderate, I know, but I had recently watched the episode of The Simpsons where Homer bought Marge a bowling ball with his own name on it, so the concept was still fresh in my prepubescent head. I know that doesn't justify it at all, but I'm sure you know that I truly regret my actions that day, especially when I played the game and found it to be more amazing than the original.
Number 4, overrated.
At first I was going to open this section with a stand-up routine inspired by George Carlin, but after working on this video, I realized that not only did it take too long, it hardly covered anything about the game in question. It wasn't funny regardless, so here's the punchline. Super Smash Bros. Melee is overrated because people think it's better than Brawl. Hear me out. There are 2 types of people that prefer Melee. In the first group, there are people that obsess about a certain thing about Melee. They might love Roy, Dr. Mario, Mewtwo, or Pokéfloat so much that they cannot stand playing a game without one of these things. They might love playing with items off, using only 8 characters, and playing on the most boring of stages. They might just really love the invisibility cloak. The second group of people are the ones that compare the two as fairly as they can, admit that each game does some things better than the other one, and just prefer playing Melee. The second group is understandable, as Melee is a formidable opponent when compared to just about anything. Although people may debate which GameCube title is the best, never have I seen a list for great GameCube games that lacks Melee. When it comes to quality, it's important to judge games individually rather than just on its pedigree, and Melee has its things, certainly. It has one of the best, if not the best, introduction in video game history. It plays faster if you prefer lightning speed, and Brawl also has its bumps like questionable final smashes, the Great Maze, and pointless dribbles such as letting you play Donkey Kong for a time shorter than it took to load it, but specifics for either side aren't relevant to my case. What's important is that there are people that think Melee is better because of the one way they prefer to play it over Brawl's infinity minus one ways to play that. Ever try playing a 4-player stamina match with permanent bunny hoods, the gravity set to light, and the speed set to fast, while all of you are playing as Sonic on the Mushroomy Kingdom? How about all of that while you're tiny? Ever wanted to have Link and Zelda fight Ganondorf while on a stage shaped like a Triforce? With all things considered, Brawl has plenty more gameplay combinations than Melee. It's like saying Skyrim is better than Oblivion solely because the sneaking mechanics are better. Okay, fair enough, Skyrim does sneaking better, but to judge the game solely on that disregards the side quests, the spells, and everything else either game has to offer. To say that Melee is better than Brawl because your whittled down version of Melee is better than your whittled down version of Brawl due to your willingness to ignore certain parts of each game pretty much fits the textbook definition of overrated, and it requires a lot of arrogance to willingly admit. Also, the animation is smoother, so ha.
Number 3, underrated.
2 years ago, I said Punch-Out for the Wii was the ultimate example of a game no one has played being awesome. However, another game was so much more so that I forgot about it and never put it on my original list of underrated games. Ever play Speedy Eggbert? It's platforming genius. You have to collect all the treasure chests in the stage, then touch the arrow to continue on to the next level. Seems simple enough for a non-linear platformer, until you run into all types of obstacles such as lava and mines. The different props in the game can be used in an excellent level designer where it's fun to use things outside of their intended use. Want to not have a container for your water blocks and just let it be free-flowing, thereby destroying all conventions of logic? Go ahead. Want to not put a floor on the bottom of the stage, thereby creating an instant game over if the player falls into it? Knock yourself out. There's hardly any story, and the music only has a few good tracks, but the platforming stands up with the all-time best. As a kid, I was expecting this franchise to become huge, but they only made a second— Wait, there's a second Speedy Eggbert? I guess I better go collect some cash.
Number 3, overrated.
Yes, I know Sonic has had an influence on just about every video I've made, but could you blame me? He was one of the most iconic video game characters of the 20th century, and regardless of what you think of his games now, you cannot deny Sega becoming a third-party company was a fall from grace. If you ever went back in time to 1996 and told people, one day Sonic games will be on Nintendo consoles, people would look at you like you had two heads. But it's true. One of these games was Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, the third Sonic game I ever played and a definitive game from my childhood. The game is good and all, but it gets way too much recognition as the best Sonic game ever. Let's do some deductive reasoning for a second. The treasure hunting levels are okay at best and unbearable at worst, and the shooting levels, while fun, are not outstanding. To those who have played the game, I present a question. Did you ever pop the game in thinking to yourself, wow, I can't wait to dig emerald pieces out of the ground or hover over the ocean while shooting at airplanes? Probably not. Everyone I've met pines for the action levels, or Sonic and Shadows for those that have never bothered glancing at the tutorial and have never played multiplayer. These stages comprise 10 out of the 30 levels, 11 and a fifth out of 32 if you count the stage from the last story, and that secret level. Out of all of these, only 3 of them have interweaving routes. The rest of them are linear and platforming is rarely required. The story has one very strong flaw that cannot be ignored. How did everyone mix Sonic up with an ultimate biological weapon they've kept in captivity for 50 years? You think someone on the highest level of gun security would mention that the area where Shadow was held captive had a break-in? Even worse, Eggman and Amy themselves get confused as well. What do Sonic and Shadow have in common anyway? They're both biped hedgehogs, both can homing attack, spin dash, and light dash, both have super forms, and then the similarities end. So what happened? Is everyone colorblind? Did the writers forget about how Sonic helped save what was left of Station Square from chaos in the first Sonic adventure? I doubt it, since they do reference Tails and what he did in that game. This plot hole is greater than how Amy even wound up on Prison Island in the first place. I obsessed over Chow when I was younger, but now I realize that it was a way to convince players to keep playing the same levels over and over again to earn the final emblems. Did it work? The jury's out on that one. But the absolute worst crime done on behalf of Sonic Adventure 2 and its GameCube counterpart? You can't progress through the story through the stage selection option. What the hell?
Number 2, underrated.
For those of you who haven't clicked away from the video after that previous statement about Sonic Adventure 2's stage select progression due to how moronic it was, my final complaint was a ruse. I'm actually trying to bring to light how stupid a complaint is for Shadow the Hedgehog. I saw a person state that it was horrible that you could not make story progress outside of story mode. Thank God the count of people that I've seen complain about this remains at 1. Confession time. I don't like Shadow the Hedgehog as much as I used to. There was a time when I felt it was horribly misunderstood and can hardly do any wrong. Hell, I even thought this when I made my first list of underrated games. However, very recently, I was browsing through TV Tropes article on the game, and strangely it, of all things, opened my eyes to a few problems. There are stages where the item behind the 5-key door does squat to help you, one time where Sonic will give you instructions contradictory to the mission you are attempting to do, and the camera on Cosmic Fall is wonky. However, it's the anti-LA Noire in the sense that once you strip away the aesthetics, the gameplay is pure gold. It's so much fun to speed through the stages as quickly as you can, and the variety of missions makes it so you never have to play the same combination of missions twice. The controls are a lot like Sonic Heroes is, which is to say, Sonic Adventure 2 with the speed boost item permanently turned on. Not only does it just take time to get used to the controls, it hardly takes any time at all, and I would compare it to riding a bicycle. Look, the footage you see here was recorded by yours truly after having not played Shadow the Hedgehog for 3 months. And while I will say my chain was a little rusty, I'd say I performed alright. The story also seems to get a bad rap because people say it jumps back and forth, but there's 2 points to cover here. First, in choose-your-own-adventure type books and games, things that are normally independent of one another become dependent. For example, in Skyrim, at the College of Winterhold, the Master Illusionist will greet you by asking you if you can see him. If you say yes, he'll complain that his spell isn't working and that he's trying to become invisible. But if you say that you can't see him, he'll say that you can at least hear him, so he must be making progress in reversing his invisibility spell. It's not the greatest imitation of reality, but at least you get different experiences each time you play through it. 2. It doesn't really jump back and forth at all. Shadow will only start mentioning Dr. Eggman after he appears at least once, and if you teleport to Iron Jungle when you've been a good boy, Sonic and his friends will know this and ask you to join them on their way to the Ark. One of the dumbest complaints that has sprung only recently is that you need to play the game 10 times to unlock the true ending. I don't know what's dumber, complaining about how some endings are untrue in a choose-your-own-adventure game, or the fact that the statement implies you do the exact same thing each playthrough. While the statement is technically correct, yes, you do need to beat the game 10 times to unlock the last story, its maligned applications are plastered with misanthropy. They use it as though you play the exact same levels 10 times. The fact is altered similarly to the fact that women make 70 cents of every dollar a man makes, or, closer to Sonic, that Sonic Generations has you play the same level twice before you can continue. If you have no idea of the reality of the situation, it makes sense. Provided you have the information, though, you know that women have different jobs and hours than men, Sonic Generations has different levels for classic and modern Sonic, and Shadow the Hedgehog has different and interweaving routes. On the contrary, the game has quite a few unique perks none of the other 6th generation home console Sonic games had. For starters, this was the only one where you played as one character. No more gliding in the air and digging in the ground for emerald pieces, it was homing attacks and light dashes. It balanced the speed expected in the Sonic game with actually doing something. For normal missions, one had to tromp to the goal, which is fun because you can tackle it at your own pace. Unlike the classic Sonic games, memory is not a large factor if you ever have hopes of going fast. The stage often gives you plenty of distance to see what's ahead, and you can very easily plan your next movement before you get there. Then there are the Hero and Dark missions. Although you can still complete these missions quickly, they require more grace and agility to do so than the normal get-to-the-goal missions. They range from anything from collecting 400 rings to destroying an enemy ship, your enemy being whoever you choose. The only stage with Hero and Dark stages that truly aggravate the player is the Doom, and that's if you're expecting a mission that won't require your thinking cap. Once you realize that unbridled speed is not going to be your strongest asset, all goes well. That's not to say that the Doom or any stage in particular cannot be completed quickly once you put your mind to it, but rather that the entire game is not as bland as traveling on a linear path. On the accounts that it does use a linear path, it pulls it off really well. The gravity of how I will never be able to play Lethal Highway's Dark Mission for the first time ever again hasn't completely sunken in yet. I don't think it ever will. How about levels that are linear and slow? Similar to Lethal Highway, Final Haunt's Hero Mission was astounding the first run through. You needed to watch your step as you traveled through Black Doom's lair, and Sonic was seriously helpful with progress, which is something Sonic games can really use more of. Stupid Elmo Chow. For Shadow the Hedgehog, all they really need to do is remove pointless vehicles, polish the game more, and it would be my favorite game of all time.
Number 2. Overrated.
Released on the NES in 1986, Metroid has a special characteristic I have never seen in any other game. The more you look at it, the uglier it becomes. With each time I play this game, I find more and more problems, and I have no interest in finding the bottom of this rabbit hole. First, the game is ugly quite literally, in the sense that the graphics are horrible. But gaming, this was the NES. Shut your goddamn trap and let me finish. I'm aware this is on the NES, but this game, as some people like to call it, has it where you cannot see yourself for a few seconds after being hit. Couple this up with the fact that there's no temporary invincibility when you're hit, and you can be killed in a matter of seconds without even noticing it. While recording footage of Metroid for this video, I did not become invisible after being hit. This is a bittersweet situation for me, because while that means that it does not make you invisible after being hit all of the time, it means that the game enjoys changing the rules. To add salt on the wound, when you die, you only come back with 30 health, meaning that you have to farm all of it back for no good reason. There really isn't a point to not give us full health if the developers had any idea that since each hit takes a mouthful of health, we'd be slaving for more anyway. Oh, it makes the game longer? It's filler. Painful filler. The Japanese version of Metroid had the ability to save, possibly storing your health information, but we have to type in really long passwords. The music is okay at best and horrible at worst. Kraid's theme played with bass tones hurts the eardrums, and I'm unsure if Ridley's theme was supposed to induce psychological torture as an effect, but even if it were, that's not a good idea in the first place. For those more musically inclined, the Brinstar Overworld theme has homophonic tones, one lower than the other. The lower tone is discreet, but if you notice it and pay attention to it, it will fatigue your tympanic membrane to the point of pain. But do you want to know the absolute worst part about Metroid? Do you really want to know? Sooner or later you'll be stuck, shooting random blocks, when one of them breaks. This means that some blocks are breakable, but which ones? That's right, the majority of this game isn't even doing combat or climbing unnecessarily long shafts, but shooting blocks and hoping it leads to another room. Add in the fact that there's no in-game map, not even a very graphically poor one placed on the pause menu in a way that wouldn't strain the capabilities of the NES, and you're going to get lost and piss at everything very quickly. After farming for a full amount of health and destroying random blocks, I came across this room designed to look like a nearby room that leads to a power-up. In contrast, this room leads to a pit. I don't enjoy taking clips from other people, but this scene from the Game Grumps almost perfectly describes the battle between the left and right hemispheres of my brain.
Just go ahead and truck it back to look how silly this is!
Are they gone?
You have to like do. Okay. Aaron, don't be. Aaron, don't. Aaron! I love you!
No, I'm fucking done! I'm fucking done!
No, you're not!
This is bullshit!
I'm gonna go.
This is fucking bullshit!
I can't get off!
What is this?
I can't get off!
What is this?
I'm stuck!
What is my life? I can't do it, John!
I can't eat!
I can't fucking do it anymore!
You whatever! You can give up now, or you can figure it out, because I certainly can't do it without you, and I know you can't do it without me.
I appreciate it, but look what we're dealing with, man!
Aaron,
You gotta draw the line somewhere!
Aaron, we
gotta draw a fucking line in the sand, dude!
Aaron,
we gotta make a statement! You gotta look inside yourself and say, what am I willing to put up with today? Not fucking this!
Metroid has a game very similar to it. It's called Milon's Secret Castle. What makes no sense is how that game is panned by the world, and yet people think Metroid stands anywhere above it, let alone how some people cite Metroid as one of the best games of all time. In fact, I did an experiment a few years back, and I've recreated it now. On the Angry Video Game Nerd's video covering Milon's Secret Castle, I facetiously wrote a comment saying, "The AVGN is just a pussy because he cannot beat a game that doesn't have a fairy that says, 'Hey, listen, put your bomb here,' which is a statement I once heard sent against me about Metroid." I got this response. "Oh right, because you know, expecting children to know to fire at a block that looks no different from any other blocks in the game and also not assume it's not a secret, but something you are supposed to do throughout the entire game totally isn't a viable complaint." Let's also not forget that there is no tutorial as to what you are supposed to do, nothing telling you what to do, hidden everything, and dead-end rooms. Interesting how relatable this is to Metroid, huh? Well, I replied, I suppose you have a point. Shooting everything trial and error style can become pretty aggravating. Tell me, have you ever played the original Metroid? What do you think of it? He can no longer be reached for further comment. Here's a collection of other responses I have received. So what's my point in this exercise? I'm trying to figure out how it is that people can support the AVGN for hating Milon's Secret Castle for its nonsense, yet when I point out the same problem in Metroid, I get blasted with even more nonsense. Interestingly enough, I have never met a person on the internet who hates Metroid, but nobody in real life I have met who has played it says it's anything but garbage. I've heard 3 very popular arguments on why Metroid is a good game and why this hunk of transitors that creates combinations of red, green, and blue on the screen is worth more than me. Argument 1. It's a good game. It's not the game's fault that you suck. First, I must not suck too much if I beat the game. Yes, I used a guide on the internet to salvage as many brain cells as I could from the massacre, but I got to the ending screen without ever using one of the password cheats or hacks. Second, there are lots of games that I am bad at that are still fun to play. Hell, if fake difficulty is a surefire way to exempt your game from criticism, then I should get into programming. Argument 2. You can forgive it because it's old. Point number 1. I really doubt that the game was less unbearable than it is today, since they didn't have any internet guys and had to work harder to get the information they needed. 2. It's quite the converse. It's not bad because it's old because it's bad. Games like Donkey Kong and the first Mega Man stand the test of time because there were no attempts on your sanity. Meanwhile, the original Metroid was so bad that Yoshio Sakamoto, a man who had been working on Metroid since the beginning, directed Metroid Zero Mission as a way to admit that the first one was a flop. This new version of the game had all types of advanced features such as ducking and temporary invincibility. It only took 18 years, but better late than never, right? I still say they should have changed the name from Metroid Zero Mission to Metroid. Okay, we fucked up, but here, we fixed the game. Could we be friends now? Finally, people say it's forgivable because it spawned a bunch of other great games. I enjoyed all other Metroid games I have played, but it's important to judge each game as an individual, and in that sense, the more you play the original installment, the more bullshit you'll uncover. Just don't buy it. Please. Now for honorable mentions before we get to number 1. For underrated, we have a game that barely missed the list, and for overrated, we have a rule breaker. Let's go in the order we always have, shall we? Telltale Games Poker Night 2 is underrated. A poker-based video game is a pretty simple concept and is nigh impossible to innovate in itself, so naturally anyone offering one needs to deliver other goodies in order to stand out. More than anything, this game offers quite the interesting ragtag team of opponents. Brock from the Venture Brothers, or as I like to call him, Patrick Warburton, Claptrap from Borderlands 2, Ash Williams from Army of Darkness, and Sam from Sam & Max. There's also other characters such as GLaDOS as the dealer. The real genius of the game comes from the character interactions, which are much more amusing in the context of the game rather than, say, watching it on the internet. The dialogue can become repetitive at times based on how the game is designed, but if I'm completely honest, a lot of the interactions have a hard time aging. The game also has unlockable themes in Omaha Hold'em, the latter to which I have to admit I have since become addicted. One thing I find amusing is that Steam only features one review for this game, a review that I believe accentuates the negative way too much. There are conversations that interrupt the flow of the game, and there's no multiplayer, but for $5, it's hard for me to suggest a better game to play on a long airplane flight or when you want a game that's entertaining but not stimulating. The overrated game I'm going to mention honorably is Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Ignoring the fact that how many people consider it the greatest Sonic game ever makes it ripe for the picking as overrated, I find that the greatest problem with this game is that it really isn't a game at all. Allow me to explain. Back in 1993, during the production of Sonic 3, Sega and Sonic Team wanted Sonic 3 to have a large amount of stages, spanning from the breezy Angel Island to the terrifying Death Egg. However, time, budget, and technical restraints forced them to split it into 2 separate games, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Sonic and Knuckles. With a lock-on capability, Sonic and Knuckles could easily be attached to Sonic 3, granting you Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Sounds cool, but for all intents and purposes, it has as much validity as counting Sonic Mega Collection as the greatest Sonic game ever, since that has Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Sonic 2, and Sonic all on one game. Even if it were intended to be one game, it was sold as 2, and that's fact. If intent were the same as the real deal, then we would have perfect roads, no poverty, and everyone would live as long as they like, which would be a long time in this hypothetical perfect world. In reality, the Super Emeralds have, as of the making of this video, never been mentioned again. The Sonic 4 manual says it takes place after Sonic and Knuckles. Sonic Generations credits say Sky Sanctuary comes from Sonic and Knuckles, and you still need to buy both Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles on the Wii Shop channel to unlock Sonic 3 and Knuckles, when hardware, budget, and time are no longer issues. The only argument in favor of Sonic 3 and Knuckles? Oh, Yuji Naka may or may not have said that that was the intended creation. Regardless of what the creator of Sonic said, the actions of the company speak louder than a few words. You know what? Let me drive my point as hard as I possibly can with an analogy. Sonic 06. The game was intended to be much more than it was, but thanks to time restraints and because third-party companies were still learning how to program for the newest consoles, it was released too early. But hey, it was intended to bring Sonic to a whole new generation and to be a groundbreaking installment of genius, so therefore it is, right? It had patches added later to make it closer to the original product, so it's unfair to discuss the original release, right? Right? In all seriousness, the only true reason anyone could stand saying Sonic 3 and Knuckles counts as one game is because they want it to be a single game. They believe that if it were one game, it would just be too mind-blowingly astounding to be true. But it isn't true. It's a childish statement, and those who stand by it have as much validity discussing Sonic the Hedgehog as a person has discussing astronomy when he or she believes the Earth is flat and all objects in the solar system orbit it.
Number 1, underrated.
When Metroid Other M appeared as the most underrated game 2 years before this video was released, I more or less did a cop-out. I did talk about the story a little bit, but went into saying that story isn't a big deal and that if you let it destroy a game for you, you're taking it too seriously. Apparently a few people think story is super important, so let me clear something up. On a technical level, story is about 10% of a game's quality. More important, gameplay and control. Story is important, but not enough to cripple a game alone. I could say, if you want a story, go read a book or watch a movie, but that'd be dumb too, as movies have things such as proper lighting, camera angles, and acting, and books have writing style. Since I was lazy before, allow me to make up for it now with an in-depth analysis of the story. Metroid Other M depicts the story of Samus Aran, taking place an undefined amount of time after the events of Super Metroid. Oh, and by the way, spoilers for that game. She remembers the events where the baby Metroid gives its life to save her own. It's safe to assume that 3 years passed between the tutorial and when Samus, drifting off into space, picks up a signal codenamed Baby's Cry. A code synonymous with SOS in the sense that if your baby was crying, you'd leap over tall buildings in a single bound to check on it. Out of the goodness in her heart, and because the codename resonates with her, she flies to go check it out. At the bottle ship, she runs into her previous commander, Adam Malkovich, an old friend named Anthony Higgs, and some newcomers that follow Adam. Samus decides not to use her weapons out of respect for the other manumitters, but very shortly uses basic weaponry to take out a monster with the help of Adam and his men. Adam then asks Samus for her help on the grounds that she's treated on the same level as his soldiers, and realizing it would be better to work together, Samus obliges. Metroid Other M is a game that's story deals with motifs of expectation, change, and loss, while also covering the philosophical question of applying scientific discoveries. Expectation. Samus expects Adam to be an outstanding leader and to treat her with the same level of responsibility of his subordinates, but realizes him to not be all that he's cracked up to be when he doesn't tell Samus that she can use her Various suit in the sector of the bottle ship filled with lava. Is Adam testing her trust and tells her to activate it only when he knows a monster is going to attack her? Does he have faith in Samus' ability to trek through while taking minimal yet unnecessary damage, knowing that she is a famous bounty hunter known the galaxy over? Is he just ignorant and then remembers at the end while realizing what a moron he was? Regardless, Samus sticks to her promise and trudges through. This brings us to the subject of authorization, how Samus has almost all of her powers already and Adam has to authorize use of them. Naturally, her major weapons are a big deal, but things such as suit upgrades and her grapple beam seem to not be a problem, but Adam refuses to let her use them at the beginning anyway. Does Adam think by making exceptions that Samus will open the floodgates? Is he playing a trust game with Samus when a person's life may ride on this mission? Is he just a horrible leader? Apparently Samus herself does not enjoy using powers unless the situation calls for it, proven how she does not wear her final suit at the beginning of the game. No matter the reason Adam places such restrictions, I really find it hard to say that even having to collect a specific amount of cheeseburgers in order to unlock powers would be dumber than losing them all when you crash into a wall when your suit is designed to take a beating a la Metroid Prime. The other games don't do a good job at this either. They either hand-wave it to the point where players need to insert their own ideas, or they do something stupid. The only game that was close was Metroid Fusion in saying that she lost it when parts of her power suit needed to be surgically removed. Even then, how could she regain those different weapons and use them all effectively with what is pretty much half of her suit? I'd honestly say that Metroid Other M does the best job at explaining the scenario, since even the worst explanation of Adam just being an idiot makes more sense in reality. I'll take questionable leadership integrity over questionable structural integrity any day of the week. Back to expectation. In the game, Samus encounters a little furry animal that likes honey. Later on, it is assumed that a larger monster ate this animal's innards. Turns out that the furry animal became that monster, which eventually became Ridley. Samus does not piece this together until after her fight with the dragon-like monster. At the encounter, Samus freezes at the sight of Ridley. Is this absurd? Not in the slightest. The monster ate her parents in front of her, forcing her to have to be raised by an alien race and dedicate her life to killing Ridley. She has been brought to the brink of death on just about every single encounter with Ridley. She also saw planet Zebes explode with Ridley on it, and yet here the dragon stood, ready to attempt to kill her once again. She has no idea that this is a clone. She concludes that Ridley must have survived the explosion. She hasn't seen Ridley in years and expected to be rid of that nightmare for good. After seeing Ridley again, she realizes this being will never be out of her life and freezes up. This is the part where a few of you are probably citing the classic argument. Well, if Samus acts like this in front of Ridley, why didn't she act like this in the previous games? Well, if you let me answer a question with a question, if the sun is so hot, then how come there isn't a lot of steam when it sets into the ocean? Your question and mine have a similar thing in common with all stupid questions. They miss an important part of their respective situations. You wanted that piece of crap that can barely run a password system, let alone a map, to have a cutscene of Samus showing fear towards Ridley, all while hiding her identity as a woman? You cheeky bastard. Well, what about Zero Mission? That had a cutscene and those eyes can't be interpreted as fear at all. Considering that she has proven to be afraid of Ridley through encounters during the series, I'm really surprised she stood on her feet, and I commend her for it. If you'll let me shoehorn something in real quick without a transition, the deleter subplot was simply dropped midway through it. Or at least that's what most players expect, and as a result they dislike it because they expect the yarn spinners to tell them absolutely everything. If you pay close attention to the events and put the pieces together, you'll know who the deleter is and why he stops doing things. Change, the only constant in the universe. In the case of Other M, it's quite ironic that the more things appear to change, the more they stay the same. One example of such pseudo-change is how Samus remembers that Adam respects all life, yet Adam says to Samus that Metroids needed to die. Has Adam changed? Does Samus have twisted views of Adam? The answer is neither. Samus has also said that Adam is a staunch opponent of the use of bioweapons, so Adam's actions are simply what happens when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force. Change is most prevalent outside of the game, however, with how the player interacts with it. Obviously the largest change is with Erin. She now presents her thoughts to the player. Not a single thing she says or does contradicts her previous actions during the Metroid series. Her opinions on subjects are much more vocal, need I cite the Ridley scene again, but she can still kick ass like the bounty hunter we know and love. Samus often talks in a monotone and detached voice. Team Ninja used this as an effect to show when she's thinking to herself or narrating, to make her seem more distant from the current situation, which she clearly is when she's describing the events to the player. If you don't believe me, here's the voice of Samus herself on the situation.
There's definitely the inner monologue voice, which is detached and I've heard it described as emotionless.
It was the first joint mission I'd been a part of since becoming a freelance bounty hunter. And of course, it was the first time since my Federation days that I was following the orders of a commanding officer.
It was definitely, planned on sounding like that. And she's just looking back at past events. And so she is very much detached. And, there is a little bit of remorse in some things. And then there's her kind of real-time action voice where she's very much engaged and things are very much more urgent for her.
Adam, I can reach him. Give me the order, please.
Lock and secure the shielding doors now.
Adam, wait! There's still time. I can make it. Please let me go. That's Ian. That's your little brother out there.
Mike McGillicuddy and Dave Elvin both do a good job as Anthony and Adam respectively, both even better than Jessica Martin with Samus. The other characters, I must admit, don't really do well at all. Loss.
Blah blah blah, lady blah blah blah, the baby.
Hold it! There's an idea that she says baby in the game more often than Justin Bieber does in his song. In reality, she only talks about the baby in the introduction, in a side mention in the middle of the game, and then near the end. So yes, Loss covers the baby Metroid and also another character's loss at the end of the game, but Adam is worth mentioning the most. Upon retrospect, Adam Malkovich reminds me of Cole Phelps from LA Noire. Regardless of what you think of his leadership and other characteristics, he proves himself in the end by putting the mission, Samus, and the lost person aboard the bottle ship first, and gives his life for the cause. Shooting Samus beforehand, either he was not sagacious and collapsed under pressure because he didn't think about how to stop Samus, or he realized that incapacitating her suit would stop her from rushing into Sector 0 as he marches towards it. Either way, Adam gave his life. What a swell guy. Science always straddles a fine line between what we can do and what we should do. Deep fried butter? Yes, please. Reproducing hamburger bacteria? A clone colony of Metroids with a mother brain and a Metroid queen? No, thank you. Of course, some scientists thought it was a genius idea, probably so they could use invincible Metroids to take over the galaxy, and hid their work on the bottle ship. They set the self-destruct button in the same area where the Metroids lived, so nobody working on the project would be willing to stop it once it began. Then there's the morality of creating an intelligent robot that is fully aware of its existence and later destroying it. Is it murder? Is it not? The atmosphere of Other M exchanges the series' typical isolation for mystery. You arrive on what seems to be an all but abandoned ship, and it's up to you and Adam's group to discover what happened here, who sent the distress call, who among Adam's men wants you all dead, and much more. I say they pulled off the mystery theme quite nicely, since you could figure things out for yourself if you gave it enough thought. Beyond the story, the gameplay is great, except for the obscure pixel hunts, those can go die in a fire. It is linear, but none of the Metroid games besides the original really were unless you used glitches. The other Metroid games did have interweaving routes, but you still needed to complete objectives in a certain order. Combine this with the fact that you needed certain upgrades to become super mobile, and the games are more linear than you think. The ability to focus energy for healing also cuts out any form of farming you could ever need, so that's good too. It's almost impossible to focus during a boss fight without getting hit, so if you can pull it off, you more than deserve that extra health with which to keep on fighting. Other than that, it feels rather faithful to a 3D interpretation of classic Metroid gameplay, but use of a control stick might have left room for deeper mechanics. A complaint I hear too often is how people consider the last two fights in Other M to be as confusing as I believe the original Metroid is. If you haven't played Other M, please divert your attention, as I'm going full spoiler. First, the Metroid Queen. Some people never realized that you needed to use power bombs while inside the beast's stomach. I had almost no trouble. First off, you couldn't exit morph ball mode, and second, normal bombs didn't do a thing. For me, there was really only one conclusion, and the difficulty was remembering what the researcher said to me when I'm inches away from death due to stomach acid. I loved it. Second is the fight against MB. Aliens controlled by MB swarm, and you need to defeat them all. Or do you? No, you need to place your cursor on MB and then you're done. I understand the complaint that this final fight shouldn't be beatable by sheer accident, maybe make it so you have to fire a super missile at MB, but to hate the fight because the aliens keep coming and because thoughtlessly attempting to ford through the aliens doesn't work? Invalid. I'll admit that the first time I did this, I died. I kept shooting the aliens. But then, in a moment of basic observation, I thought to myself, what if I attack the leader? Man, I'm an idiot for not thinking this before. I mean, really, do you want me to cite other video game examples where you're supposed to attack the person creating the enemies instead of the enemies themselves? But Other M does have flaws. The one I'm certain we can all agree on is the music. As in, what music? This game has music? The other Metroids had music while still leaving a feeling of isolation. Here, the developers took the easy way out by deciding the best isolation sounds would be none, and now I can hardly remember a track from the game. There are other small problems here and there, but I think I'm dragging on for too long, so let me make one thing clear. Out of the 8 Metroid games I have played, Other M is my 5th favorite. However, while saying Other M is the best Metroid game will make me laugh, saying it's the worst, worse than the original, will only make me laugh even harder. So if Other M isn't the single greatest Metroid game to ever exist, what makes it the single most underrated game ever? Well, if there's only one reason, it's because the retailers sell this game new for only $5. Even more so, the price of it dropped by 75% from 2011 to 2013. This is a bittersweet situation because while now people that are wealthy enough to afford a Wii have no excuse to not buy it, it implies that the game is only worth $5. What else is worth $5? Well, a decent cheeseburger, a gallon of organic milk, 6 tennis balls, 1/6 of a WinRAR license, a virtual copy of Metroid, and if you think Metroid is not that bad, there's plenty of other games that are only $5, such as
Approaching sound barrier!
M&M's kart racing. But maybe I'm looking too far into this. After all, my copy of Metroid Prime I got when I was little costed only $5, and people love that game. Maybe it has to do more with why people hate the game than I thought after all. Look, if you think Samus's listening to Adam brings the strongest bounty hunter in the Metroid universe to worthlessness, you sound just like my edgy brother who thinks taking out the trash is a form of submission. Hate Metroid Other M just because you think the story's bad? Fine. Go back to watching Jerry Springer and Here Comes Honey Boo Boo. The adults are talking.
Number 1. Overrated.
The second most overrated game is the worst I have played, and the most overrated game is the second worst I have played. A considerable distance exists between second and first place in terms of overratedness, and there's also a considerable distance for second and first when it comes to overall just being bad. What are the odds? While some people do regard Metroid as unbecoming, it's really hard to find people that hate this game. Super Mario Galaxy 2 does do things right. It has graphics that can match the 360, just about perfect controls with programming so you never have a problem with the analog's neutral position, and well-orchestrated music. However, Super Mario Galaxy 2 reminds me of LA Noire's problem set to 11. They completely mutilated the gameplay, the most important thing, in exchange for being great on just about everything else. Super Mario Galaxy 2 has 2 major flaws, its difficulty and its repetition. The first one is more subjective, so we'll cover that one first. This is probably the first mainstream Mario game in which I have never seen the game over screen, even while not actively avoiding it. The game floods you with lives, knowing that a lot of people in life are afraid of failure and need an excuse to keep playing. More than half of my lives were lost not from deaths in the game, but from the fact that when you turn the game off, it doesn't save your lives. It isn't a big deal in the first place, but I have a feeling that they implemented it so that people wouldn't realize otherwise that they would have triple-digit Marios. Collecting 50 star bits for a life is laughable, and there's hardly an obstacle that can't be crossed by doing a long jump to a spin, nor a wall that can't be climbed by doing a triple jump to a wall kick and then using a spin to reverse your direction. A lot of the secret stars never felt like you were rewarded for crafty thinking, it was often just going another route. I know a lot of these problems can be directed towards the first Galaxy, but it's a lot more prevalent in this one. Some green stars have fake difficulty in order to acquire them, such as having you go through an obstacle course and then jump off a cliff at the very end. If you miss, you must redo the entire obstacle course again. Never during this star in particular do you ever feel like you're adequately challenged. If you miss the first few times, you'll just shrug it off, but if you keep missing, you'll get really frustrated having to do the same obstacle course again and again. During the few missions such as these that might actually threaten you with a game over, you'll never feel like your skills are being adequately tested and instead will believe that the developers are just pulling dumb shit in a cheap attempt to make you feel satisfied. I will repeat it, going through an obstacle course you have already been through, missing your jump by a degree, and then having to go through the entire obstacle course again isn't a test of skill, it's a test of patience. Speaking of green stars, did you know Super Mario Galaxy 2 can be mathematically proven to be a bad game? Pay attention. Shigeru Miyamoto has said while producing the game that the game was about 90% to 99% original content. In contrast, the game copies from Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, the first Galaxy, and even itself. The game has 242 stars in total, with 120 of them being green stars. For those that don't know, green stars are stars placed in levels you have already completed. To find them, you just listen for a shimmer or notice a green glowing thing in the corners of your screen. Better than playing the entire game again as Luigi to unlock the final stars? Yes, but not by much. Anyways, subtract 120 for all those go through the stage and notice some doohickey on the side of the road stars. Next is prankster comments. These are redoings of previous levels with an added requirement such as a time limit. These are copy-paste as well, and remove 38 more stars. Finally, you have to factor out the stars copied from other games. The Throwback Galaxy was awesome in the trailer I saw for the game, but 5 minutes into it, you should get bored if you played the N64 one. Plus, the Twisty Trials Galaxy from Super Mario Sunshine made all the blocks bigger and added other things to make it easier, which was really unnecessary. Subtract 6 for these previous game repeats, and we have 78 stars left. 78 divided by 242 is roughly 32%, which is a third of the quota Miyamoto stated. You know, last time I read about people behind video games lying about their products, an angry fan complained to the Federal Trade Commission about Mass Effect 3's ending. What's up with Shigeru Miyamoto? Why did he have to lie to us? Why would they charge us money to play things we have already played? It is an affront to all things good in this universe that there are people that baselessly accuse Shadow the Hedgehog of requiring you to play the same game 10 times to reach the end, but Super Mario Galaxy 2 gets a free ticket for repetitiveness. I'll finish my section on Super Mario Galaxy 2 by inserting a quote that Shigeru Miyamoto said about Donkey Kong Country, which I believe is a much more fitting quote for Super Mario Galaxy 2 than his quote about 90% ever was. Gamers are willing to deal with mediocre gameplay as long as the art is good. A video this long more than deserves a credit sequence. Instead of just playing some music and calling it a day, I realized I could cover some things that deserve special attention. I have a limited amount of time, so I'll cover what I deem most important. First off, I want to clear something up that might seem a little confusing. I say that Melee is overrated because Brawl is better, yet I also say to judge Metroid on its own merits. This might seem contradictory, but the confusion comes from the difference between overrated and bad. Metroid is overrated in part because it's bad, Melee is solely overrated because Brawl doesn't get a fair shake from far too many people. Yes, such people do exist. They're in larger numbers than you think. If you like Melee over Brawl, more power to you. Just make sure that you judge both games for everything they have to offer. I mean, if I were to say that Brawl is better than Melee solely because I believe Zelda is more fun to play as in Brawl than in Melee, you guys would be all over me, wouldn't you? I hope you would. Also, I feel I have a bone to pick with a certain someone. Some call me Johnny. I don't hate him or anything, but his review of Shadow the Hedgehog really disturbed me. At first I thought it was an excellent piece of propaganda, lies and slander peppered with kernels of truth, but then I realized it's a genius satire on the double standards of the common Sonic fan. Don't believe me?
Look at all this fucking purple and gray. This is a man's game about a superpowered 3-foot hedgehog. Look at Shadow go. Yeah, ride that slow-moving block. Look at all these pretty streaks of light in a sequence that only requires me to tilt the analog stick at certain points. Watch as Shadow travel at a high speed with no input required from the player, and observe as Shadow falls slowly toward the ground all the damn time. Behold as the terrible controls require me to slowly inch my way through each level to avoid running into shit or running off a cliff.
His next complaint on the game's morality system isn't covered in any other Sonic game, so I'll address it. While the teammate complaining is disheartening, it's not like the game developers didn't factor these sections into the ranking system. Hell, a lot of these sections are skippable with enough cunning. I mean, the section you showed is one of these skippable sections. The point I'm trying to make is that it's unfair to critique Shadow for these errors when other games, especially Sonic games, have made them. I guess I missed the complaint about falling in the Sonic Adventure 2 review. Overrated and underrated video games are interesting topics to discuss because the more people that say that a video game is underrated, the less underrated it becomes. I mean, anyone can say that Call of Duty and Skyrim are overrated, but how many people say Donkey Kong Country for the GBA? The only entry on this list where a lot of people would agree with me would probably have to be Sonic Adventure 2. And even then, the people that think it's the greatest Sonic game ever and should be the measuring stick for all future Sonic games way exceed the people that think it's overrated. What else? Oh, I've got a good joke. What do you call a game that specifically tells you how to defeat the final part of the final boss? 10 out of 10. I mean, while Super Mario Sunshine told you where to ground pound for the final boss, it was easier said than done because there were all types of obstacles on the way. Here, it was just lining up your shot, pressing A, and then pressing Z. I would think that the part that comes before the final part of the final boss would be easier than the last part, not harder. So that's all, folks. I figured the more I say now, the less I'll have to say later. Feel free to comment on the video with your opinions, but please keep in mind that respect is earned, not given like a nickel to a hobo on the side of the street. If you support bullshit with more bullshit, I'll try to make a witty remark about how deranged you are. Otherwise, I have nothing left to say to you.